We'll get started. Good evening, everyone, and good morning for folks joining from US. Welcome to today's Healthcare Grandmaster session, powered by Healthcare Continuum in partnership with IHMR Delhi. I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's session, a friend, a mentor, colleague, Amit Guruprasad, founder and his unique title as Chief Visionary Officer at Devan MedTech Solutions. To give a background, Amit is a seasoned biomedical engineer with over a decade of experience in medical device design, development, and regulatory affairs. His expertise spans a wide range of regulatory frameworks, including FDA submissions, be it 510(k), PMA, De Novo, and quality management systems, compliant with ISO 13485, 1497, and EU MDR, among many other standards. He has an outstanding track record of helping medical device and SaMD, software as medical device companies, navigate the complex US regulatory landscape. In addition to his work with Devan MedTech Solution, Amit has been a mentor in medical technologies and devices, disrupting the industries with new solutions and approaches in this space. He has been collaborating with a lot of groups, prestigious groups, and names in the industry. We are very glad to have you, Amit, joining us today. And thanks for taking out time to spread this knowledge around navigating regulatory landscape for US. Today, Amit will guide us through the intricacies of navigating this pathways for medical devices as well as SaMD, a critical topic for those of us in MedTech industry who aim to bring innovations at the global stage. Today's insights would be invaluable in understanding how to accelerate product development while ensuring compliance with stringent regulations. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Amit. Amit, thanks again, and please take over.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction, Raghav. I really appreciate the background that you mentioned about me and my experience. And I hope a lot of people will get something from this presentation today and learn something. And also feel free to ask any questions as well. So just one more appreciation from Raghav, Manish sir, and Shekhar. They made this happen. We've been working on this for quite some time, and they've given me a platform, so I will use it. Thank you. Can you see this? Is that okay?
Can you swap the screen? It is showing the presenter mode.
Yeah. How about now?
Nothing.
Is this okay?
There's nothing coming up. Can you try sharing again? Yeah, that's good. Perfect.
Okay, so today's conversation will be revolving around navigating US FDA frameworks for medical devices on a high level, and then we'll also discuss software as a medical device, and what the trends are and how that's becoming a big hot topic in terms of AI, cybersecurity, and a lot of these different mechanisms that are still being developed by the agency in the United States. So it's a trend to definitely follow because it has a lot of potential, and I'll dive into that as well. So the agenda for today, as I mentioned, we'll go over SaMD, regulatory frameworks, general regulatory pathways, discussion of something that's very important to me is the pre-submission process. And I think a lot of startups and bigger companies will benefit from this pathway, but I don't think they even know about it. So I think to kind of expose that process in a way to utilize for yourself for strategy purposes in terms of how to get to market and how to really execute your design and development plan and your regulatory plan. And then we'll talk about some FDA guidances, what happens after you kind of launch your product in terms of I would say, commercialization, post-market surveillance, complaints and such, and then we'll dive into more topics about trends and the regulations around software as a medical device and also medical devices. So anything in terms of MedTech, med devices around the world, not only the US, they focus on two aspects. One aspect is safety and one aspect is efficacy. And you can't have one without the other, so they're intercorrelated. So ensuring safety and efficacy is very important, and that's how you get a lot of these approvals, clearances, grants from the FDA in terms of how to really apply design and development plans and regulation plans to get to that safety and efficacy portion. So we'll discuss the pathways, the classifications of these products based on their risk, pre-market submissions, 510Ks. I think it's a very prevalent regulatory pathway, and how a lot of companies utilize that. And it's actually, I would say, 60 to 70% of all submissions, probably even more than that, are 510Ks. So you will see a lot of that terminology moving forward. And then we'll go into the growth category of SaMD, as well as some of the challenges that are presented for this, and how do we kind of get past those challenges, and how do we kind of use technology from an operational sense to really accelerate product development. So medical device classification in the United States, it really boils down to three aspects, right? Or three different categories. The first is class 1, second is class 2, and the last is class 3. So class 1 devices are very low risk, subject to something called general controls. So even a lot of things that you guys use every day, bandages, are considered class 1 medical devices. You would never think that, right? But the thing is that, that it actually does, a lot of, I would say, medical applications, protects, wounds from getting infected and all these things. But the risk is super low because, you're not really, having it as an implant or having it in places where it's like there needs to be more design controls and risk management out of, right? But that's where you increase the classification. So a majority of the products you see on the market, or even in hospitals, talk about imaging system, MRIs, CT scans, they're all class 2. So these are moderate risk, and they have special controls around them. And most of the time, they will require a 510K submission, which, as I mentioned, is the most prevalent pathway of the U.S. regulatory FDA in terms of getting a product to the market. So think about infusion pumps. I give an example. Now, these are all class 2 products, so they need to go through this regulatory submission pathway. And I've done it a few times, and it is a lengthy process. But there's a lot of free resources out there, honestly, that can be utilized. And I want to get into that because I think a lot of companies, especially startups, can benefit from that because obviously resources for smaller companies are tight and on a constraint. But the point is that some people just don't know about these processes, and I really want to touch upon that so they can utilize it. And then lastly is class 3 devices, which are the highest risk. Think about pacemakers, think about implants, think about what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink in terms of his brain computer interface. Those are all high risk products, but they also have high reward in terms of what they're trying to do. So we will get into that a little bit as well. So this is just like an overview of what a D&D plan looks like. And I know there's a lot of words on here. I'll explain it. And I just want to make people understand the value of the graph or the visual. So the bottom half is all regulatory related kind of processes, and the top half is all quality processes or risk management processes. So the FDA is actually transitioning their quality system requirements from something called QSR to something called QMSR, which is quality management system requirements. And the reason why they're doing that is because they really want to put an emphasis on risk, and how everything and every process they want to implement in terms of a quality standard is based off a risk assessment. How are you controlling risk from the start to the finish? And, because they want to utilize something called ISO 1345 as a baseline. And that really shows how risk is really being utilized throughout all these processes. So you can see that from the left to right, it goes from concept all the way to release. And it kind of coincides with the 2 bell curves in the background, right? So the left bell curve there is, you can consider that the research bell curve. The right bell curve is the development bell curve. So when they intersect, as you can see in the middle, where that development phase is, that's when you're actually freezing the design. Before that, it's all kind of like tinkering, playing around, feasibility, kind of seeing if this product even exists or has a market to exist. But once you kind of get to that development phase where they intersect in the background, you have to freeze the design, saying, we're not going to make any changes. We know what the process is in terms of development, and we can move forward. But this also coincides with how you can utilize a lot of these phases to your advantage, right? So, request a pre-sub meeting. You can see that that starts kind of in that development phase because you have an idea, you have a concept, you have some, I would say, prototype that you can present to the FDA in this pre-submission meeting, which I'll go into next. But there's a lot of value to this meeting because it's a free process. You're not paying the FDA to review anything. It takes about 60 days to get a response in terms of your questions that you have for them. And you can also request a 1-hour meeting with them. And this can be all virtual, or you can actually go to Silver Spring, Maryland and sit down with them, which not many people have that luxury. But the point is that they're giving their time. And I think a lot of companies would benefit from their resources in terms of how they can give feedback and the insights based on your questions. And I'll get into that as well. So this is just a timeline about things, and it's really focused on 510Ks on the right side. So begin regulatory submission. It takes about 150, 200 days. It depends on the risk of your product, whether you have to kind of go into biocompatibility, cybersecurity. There's different aspects. So that yellow kind of section there is variable based off the risk and the intended use of your device. So this is a very important slide for me, at least, in terms of how I kind of help young companies really get a proper regulatory strategy in place. And this is the pre-submission process that I mentioned. And you can see that I mentioned topics that you can select as well. So how the process works is that you select 4 topics. You can see that it ranges from cybersecurity, stats, reprocessing, software, firmware. Any of these topics are eligible. And if something's not listed, you can actually specify what you want to talk about, right? But only 4 topics are allowed per a pre-submission, and you can do 5 questions per topic, so a maximum of 20 questions. But I wouldn't recommend that, because what I would recommend is to kind of respect the FDA. They're people, they're using their time, and they have they're giving their time in terms of a free resource in this process. So I stick to between 5 to 7 questions max. And those questions need to be very, I would say, succinct, but also to the point. If you have open-ended questions, you will get open-ended answers. So that's what a lot of companies fail too if they don't have the right regulatory person on their side. And what I mean by that is that I'll give you an example. I went through a previous client who did a pre-sub, and this client asked the FDA, "Do we need a clinical study?" Think about it intuitively, right? This is logic. If you ask the FDA, "Do we need a clinical study?" It's very open-ended. Of course, they're going to say yes. They want data points. They want 1 million data points. Who knows? But if you ask such an open-ended question, you will get an answer that's not going to fit well with you. And it's not anything wrong about this. This is the way to look at it. So rather than saying, "Do we need a clinical study?" you can ask this. You can say, "Based on our labeling, based on our technology, based on XYZ things in this section, does the agency think that we don't need a clinical study," right? So putting that in their kind of mindset, you can understand that, we know our technology the best, and we know we don't need a clinical study, but we just want a confirmation. Even though this is an informal, non-binding meeting, you will get an answer that is more beneficial if you phrase it that way. So the bottom part of this slide is all examples of what contents. So you have your device description, principles of operation, intended use, indications for use, your predicate table. If you're doing a 510K, what are you comparing your device to? And that's a very powerful table because you're showing the FDA you did your due diligence or your regulatory due diligence. And that will help them understand that, yes, this could be a device you compare to in terms of your 510K. Or maybe you don't have a predicate. Maybe you have to go to another route. So a lot of these are questions you should be asking in this process. And it's very powerful to get those insights. So I want to start getting into software as a medical device. So you can call it SaMD, SaMD, but it stands for software as a medical device. And the definition is that the software is intended to perform whatever intended use or medical functions without needing the physical part of the product, the hardware. So that's why it's called software as a medical device. But there's also something called SaMD, which is software in a medical device. So think about, CT scans or imaging systems. They have a software part, but also a hardware part. They need both aspects to achieve that intended indications for use. Without the hardware or without the software, the technology will fail. But software as a medical device is that, the risk is only based on the software, the algorithm, whatever it may be. So if the algorithm fails, then it fails. But if the hardware fails, the risk is very low because it's more dependent on the, I would say, the software. So this is just like a graphic I like to use. You can see that it's kind of a trinity of different things. And, sometimes it overlaps, sometimes it doesn't. But, each part has a certain definition. So as you can see, software as a medical device is just software and medical purpose for patients or whoever the intended users are. And in the middle is the SaMD I mentioned, because that's a kind of it kind of overlaps between all those three aspects: the hardware, the software, and the purpose for medical patients. So as I mentioned before, regulatory pathway is really dependent on the device's risk, right? Risk and intended use. So if you're, for the people listening, if you're developing a product, and you're starting kind of from scratch, day one, like I would say ideation phase or concept phase, or what do you want to call it? Something that you should really jot down, and this could be a draft. You need to jot down or write down intended use or an indication for you. What is the purpose of the product? What is it meant to do? How is it meant to kind of really understand the device's risk, right? So my point is that it's one of these things where people need to kind of use that to their advantage, because that'll define your regulatory risk. So this device supposed to do X, Y, Z things, and is it a diagnostic? Is it supposed to diagnose something? These are important because the FDA looks for this. This is the main statement you should be focused on in the beginning stages. And over time, it will evolve, obviously, but you got to start somewhere. So my point is that, that intended use statement, which is going to be part of your regulatory submission anyway, you should start that as soon as possible, because that'll dictate your potential regulatory pathway. So this is just a graphic of what I kind of mentioned, right? Class 1, class 2, class 3. Like, what do you need in each of these classifications? Class 1, these are 510K exempt most of the time, meaning that you don't need a regulatory submission. All you need to do is register and list the product, and you can start selling. But obviously, you still need to have controls around it, meaning like, what does your quality system look like? How are you handling complaints? I mean, how are you even, recording any documents? Version control. So even though it's a low risk product, you still need these controls around it, because you want to show that you're following certain processes in accordance with the FDA's, guidelines and also their standards. So it's important to kind of understand that just because it's low risk doesn't mean you can just start selling tomorrow. There are certain requirements, but the barrier is low, is my point, compared to the next two. So class 2 device, moderate risk, right? We're talking about 510K pre-submissions. Pre-submissions for pre-market submissions. So the point is that you need to kind of go through this process. You cannot avoid it most of the time. I would say 90% of the time you'll have to submit this this market clearance document or market submission, regulatory submission. And then lastly is the class 3, and I kind of touched upon this before. The implants, the companion diagnostics, and for cancer, and all these things. False negatives, false positives. The risk is very high if you're telling someone they have cancer or not, right? So the higher the kind of the intended use or the indications for use statement in terms of risk, that your risk classification will increase as well, from class 1 to class 2, class 3. But you want to kind of identify that risk at an early stage and meet with the FDA so you understand what controls, special controls, or clinical data is needed so you can prepare for that down the road. And on the right side, you can see that device classification comes first. You have the regulatory pathway, and it kind of goes up, right, in terms of like what is needed. The FDA submissions may be needed, may not be needed, but regardless of classification, you will need to establish registration and device listing. So if you're a manufacturer selling any of these types of risk products, you will need to pay the FDA. I mean, this year I think it's $9,280. This is an annual fee for registration. And once you make that payment, you can register your manufacturing facility or your company's name and what products you are selling within the US market, because they need to know like who is doing what in terms of logistics, who is your contract manufacturer, who is doing what in terms of complaint handling, who is the design holder. So the FDA likes to know this from a high level, because if there were to something go wrong, they want to know if, how to kind of recall these products, if it's a high risk product, if it's actually hurting someone or even killing someone potentially. So there is a pathway for that too. And also this is the importance of quality and quality assurance. So regulatory pathways, again, like I mentioned, this is sort of a repeat, but my point is that, depending on the risk of your product or your software as a medical device, you will need to submit a specific regulatory submission. So most of the submissions, as I said, are 510Ks, meaning that if you have a software as a medical device, there's something that could be on the market that's similar to yours, right? So remember that this 510(k) process is not a marketing submission. It is a regulatory submission. So you don't want to say you're better than anything on the market. You want to say we're just as good, because we want to be safe and effective just like them, right? So it's a comparison, and that's why that table, that predicate table, is very important in terms of how we are understanding the risk, but also what are we trying to compare ourselves to if we need to compare ourselves to. The risk is so high, you will need to go to a different route. De novo means nothing to compare to, or a PMA, which is a higher risk, but you will provide more clinical data. So, as I mentioned before, as well, a lot of software as a medical device needs to adhere to specific principles and processes. Cybersecurity, for example, is a hot topic. The FDA released a guidance document last October 2023, actually a year ago. Crazy how time flies. A lot of companies are a little bit confused on what they're looking for, and I think they're kind of creating some revisions on that as well. But it's a very hot topic, and then it's all about how are you protecting the information that's being transferred from point A to point B to point Z, right? Where is it going? Where is it coming from? And who's controlling it, right? It's very important to see how patient information is being transferred but being protected at the same time. So that validation needs to be kind of in place to show the FDA we have our controls and we have done the testing. And same thing with AI and ML. Think about it. Like if you have a machine that's learning from yesterday or from a month ago, how are you controlling that machine? I mean, it is very powerful technology, but let's say you are trying to have a dosage for a cancer treatment, and this machine is controlling that dosage. It could be the worst case scenario is you're not getting enough dose or getting too much dose. But you have to have a sort of like a sandbox for this type of processes, meaning how are you controlling it, and what are you doing in place? And this is why the pre-submission process, as I mentioned, is important, because there's a topic in the pre-sub topics called PCCP, which is it's called predetermined change control plan. So how are you not changing the ML algorithm, but how are you controlling it, but also letting it do what it's supposed to do without taking too much control? So it is a very complex topic, but the point is that there are frameworks around it, and I think people should look into that if they want to apply any AI ML based methodologies. So moving forward with SaMD as well, I think a lot of these products that I've kind of focused with is that they need clinical data, right? And how much clinical data do you need? It's a very important thing. You can ask the FDA this as well in the pre-sub process. This is our clinical study plan. They won't review clinical data during the pre-sub because that's not the purpose of it, but they will give you insights on your clinical study strategy. How many patients, what are the demographics, where are the sites, all these things. They'll give you some information that can give you a better strategy on how to move forward, because clinical studies are expensive. Clinical trials are expensive. So you want to have the proper controls in place and the framework in place so you don't waste time, first of all, and you don't waste money. So you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone at that point. So key considerations, right? As I mentioned, QSR, this is the quality system regulation. So that's the current kind of framework from the FDA that's going to be changing in Feb 2026, which is, not too far away. And that's going to be called QMSR, which is Quality Management System Regulation. So a lot of manufacturers, not a lot, all manufacturers will be transitioning from this QSR to QMSR. So from my experience, a lot of these manufacturers wait till the last moment. So they're so busy with sales, they're so busy with making money, but actually quality assurance, quality systems is an investment. It's an investment not only in the company, but in the people and how to train them and how to really kind of mitigate risk of products. Because if you're selling and something goes wrong, guess what you're going to rely on? The quality system. So if you have a strong backbone as a quality system, or even a quality assurance professional, or your regulatory professional, those people are going to be handling a lot of these complaints, the feedback, and whatever's going on in the markets. So if something goes wrong, your quality system will protect you. But the point is that we as humans can do better. Now there's something called corrective and preventive action. I think it's the wrong way to really look at it. I think it should be preventive action first, and then you correct. Because if you look at the trends of what's going on the markets, you will see that you can prevent a lot of these issues from actually happening if you have the right kind of team looking at it and not really focused on, let it go wrong and then we'll fix it. Let it not go wrong at all. you can prevent these issues from happening and actually, really increase the value of your company because your compliance rate will be high, but also following a methodology that many people don't follow, and it does pay dividends. So, risk management again, and clinical evaluation, going back to, how to really design these products. This is why the FDA is transitioning towards this risk-based approach. And a lot of it should be based off this ISO 14971 standard, which is, risk management for medical devices. How are you looking at severity levels, probability levels? What are you mitigating? How are you mitigating it, right? Every kind of design requirement should have some sort of mitigation. And this is what the EU looks at as well. EU is, very high risk in terms of like the way they analyze risk. They want to understand that every requirement that you have in place for the product has a mitigation in terms of a design, instructions, training, something, anything that can mitigate that risk to an acceptable level, right? So it's very important for that for any product, including SaMDs. So you can see that here, like SaMDs, like if there's clinical evaluation, the three angles here are, clinical association, the analytics behind it, but also the validation. So they're all interconnected because you need to understand, how this output data is affecting a certain population and how you kind of really looking at it from different perspectives. So that's a very important thing to understand before doing any of these trials or studies and getting a sense of what the purpose is. Post-market requirements, what is going on after you launch these products, right? How are you understanding complaints? How are you tracking the data from the complaints, the trends? So everything is trends, right? If you're seeing the same issue happening 10 times over a 10-week period, that's a trend. It depends on what the severity is in terms of the risk, but the point is that you should be on top of these things in terms of non-conformances. And there are situations where these trends develop into adverse events and actually harm patients or even kill patients, right? So, you have to report these aspects to the FDA in terms of adverse events. And they have a public database called MOD, which is pretty much how you can see what is going on in the markets and potentially do some analysis on your own end to see what the issues are and how do we avoid those issues, because you're comparing yourself to another product and you can see that that you can get some information on how they're failing so you don't make the same mistake they did. So that's the whole point of preventive action, right? This is let's call it PACA instead of CAPA. I think it makes more sense to kind of prevent these issues than waiting for something to happen. So future trends in these regulations, right? So as I mentioned, the FDA is still developing a lot of frameworks. I don't think there's even a product out there that uses a large language model in a medical device, right? Because they don't know how to control it. They need design controls, they need regulatory frameworks that not only they're developing, but they need the public's opinion too. Public meaning the medical device manufacturers. So the FDA works with a lot of these companies to drive a better regulatory framework because it's a collaboration in a sense. So I think a lot of people are afraid of the FDA in terms of my clients. It's like sometimes they think that they're the cops or they're the police. Like, yes, their job is to provide a regulatory framework, but they do embrace innovation if you present it in the right way and if you continue to really collaborate, but also implement quality processes, because that's what they're worried about: quality assurance, design quality, risk management. So those things are very important. And that'll give you'll have good graces with the FDA, obviously. People make mistakes, we all know that, but the point is that controls need to be in place because we need to kind of work as a team to really get to that next level in terms of safety and efficacy. So that's a very important thing to really understand moving forward with technologies like software as a medical device, because the innovation rate for software is fast. You're not reliant on hardware. So it is very agile compared to a lot of these other waterfall methods. So to cap off this presentation, I just want to talk about regulatory pathways. As I mentioned, class 1, class 2, class 3, really understanding the risk of your product, your intended use, your indications for use. How are you kind of really laying that out? How are you drafting that? It can evolve. It doesn't have to be like the final version, but start doing that first if you're creating a new product, and it'll build over time as you get more information. Like I said, please utilize the pre-submission process. It's a very powerful process. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's more strategy, right? People think it's science. I think it's more art than science, because the way you kind of frame these questions and how you present yourself to the FDA is critical. So remember that pre-submission process and then the power of it, and make the most of it. You will get a lot of insights that will mitigate the risk of your project to get to market. So I'll leave it at that and I'll say thank you.
No, Amit, thanks for walking us through I know it's a vast area that you tried to cover in just a few slides. Thanks for walking us through this process. I already see a few questions on the chat. Javi, I think you have questions around whether the process is consistent for American citizens versus companies from foreign countries, and from meeting perspective as well. Is there some differentiation there? Maybe if you want to unmute and ask a question, that's fair.
Hey, good morning. Turn this off.
Hi, how are you, Lorian?
Javi, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, Amit. Thanks for the presentation. So just wondering if the process was the same or similar for American citizens or companies than for us foreigners. And like, do we need to have an American company or an American advisor to complete the process? And similarly, are we able to contact, meet, or visit the FDA as a foreigner without an American company?
No, that's not necessarily true. I mean, you can still apply for the pre-submission process and kind of interact with them. But when you're selling, right, when you have a device that's, from another country and you're trying to sell in the United States, you need to have something called an FDA agent, which is someone who is within the United States. I mean, it could be an extension of your company too, but there needs to be like a US address in a sense, right? Because when you do register and list your products on the FDA website, they need to know how that product or products are being imported and who is kind of taking care of that in terms of customs. And so there's a whole process for that, but there's no I would say discrimination if you're a foreigner, in that regard. It's just you need to have a proper process in place and have someone here who can take care of any issues if they arise, is the point.
Thank you. Can you recommend a contact, or is that something you can do? Can you tell us
Yeah,
about
contact me.
it? Okay, okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any more questions, folks? Feel free to unmute and ask your question. One question I had, Amit, was that as a startup, when you are building the product, a lot of focus in the design and development of the product. At what stage should a company be looking at FDA regulations and all? And how does their planning vary if it is a US origin company versus a company from outside US trying to enter the US market?
Yeah, I think, there's a part of device development or any product is really kind of just tinkering, right? Like in the beginning, like when the ideation phase, concept phase, where it's like, I don't think regulations need to be followed then. Like you still need to develop the product, but you need to come to a point where this actually it works or it has potential, right? So once you know that potential of that product, then I think you should start focusing on the regulations and how we can kind of, really, I would say optimize it or even, kind of modify it based on what the regulations are. Because a lot of these are, it's a necessity. You can't cut corners, right? In a lot of these topics and the compliance world, and a lot of these standards are FDA consensus standards for a reason. Like in terms of like software as a medical device, right? IEC 62304, which is an international standard for medical device software lifecycle processes. So it's a very powerful standard in terms of understanding, how to analyze risk, how to create your architecture. What are the unresolved anomalies in terms of your product? Because obviously there's always going to be bugs. It's not going to be perfect software, but you need to analyze those bugs and see what the risk is of those bugs being existent in that product on the market, right? So there's so many different kind of angles you can look at it. It's just one of these things where you should start as soon as you have an idea that this product has potential, and start doing the research, because those controls that you find in the standards and such, they will be kind of injected into your design and development plan requirements, XYZ. So it's very important for that traction.
Got it. Got it. So they should start early as soon as they have a clear idea that this would be a good, this would be required to go through the FDA post the production. No, that's helpful. Any questions from the group? Manish sir, anything you'd like to add?
No, it's a fantastic presentation, very short and crisp.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's the beauty and brevity of the whole presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Feel free to
Rashi
unmute
madam,
and
are you
ask any
there?
question.
I have a good friend of mine, Miss Rashri. Rashi madam, are you there? Okay. So anyway, Raghu, any other question?
No, we don't see anything. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute or maybe type in the chat box if you are in.
Maybe more of a comment here. What I've experienced so far, I have very little experience in this, but what I have experienced in the last few weeks is basically trying to identify whether my product or medical device is a class 1 or a class 2, or if I don't even need the FDA approval. And some people will tell you one thing and then you hear something different from another perspective. So is there any way to like find truth in this, Amit, or what do you think is like, what is your best recommendation?
Yeah. You said the word truth, right? It's interesting because a lot of it is perspective, right? And it's variable. And I mean, like your product better than I do or the FDA does because you are the design holder. You are the one that created it. So the point is that this is the whole point of the pre-submission process, right? If you have an idea, if you have this product and you don't know the risk, even if I do the research for you, if my strategy, I'm still not the agency. I'm still not the FDA. So it's important to kind of get their feedback and their sense of what the risk is of the product, because then you'll see if there's a difference between that class 1 versus class 2. Because it's important distinction to make. Because first of all, it's much easier to put a class 1 device on the market because you don't need a regulatory submission most of the time. I would say a majority of the time, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, you will not need a regulatory submission. You would just need to have a quality system in place, register your company, list the product, and then you can sell as soon as possible, honestly, as soon as they review that information. But if you're class 2, the quality system is much more, I would say, expansive in terms of the procedures, the processes, because the risk of the device is higher. So
Yeah.
my point is that interacting with the FDA at an early stage will give you that answer or that so-called truth.
Thank you, Amit. And when you say register your company, does it have to be an American company already?
That's what I said before. So you ask, foreigners versus there, right? You need someone in the US to be your US agent, because if let's say you're exporting from El Salvador and we're importing in the US, your company should have a US agent in terms of saying, yes, this person exists here, they have an address here. I don't think you can use a mailbox, it's like you have to have someone that's
Exactly.
actually, or you have to have an extension of your company that exists here.
Thank you.
I think we have another question in the chat from Surajji talking about, can you give in brief idea about time period for PMA and 510K process?
Yeah. So the 510K process is definitely shorter compared to PMA, mostly because you won't need to collect clinical data sometimes. Obviously, clinical studies are very lengthy and expensive, as I said. So some 510Ks require clinical data, but I would say most PMAs will require clinical data because these products are high risk and sometimes people have not done it. So you need to prove the safety and efficacy from that clinical standpoint. So if I were to interface with the FDA at an early stage through that pre-sub process, I would ask them, do we need a clinical study? Not like that, as I said, phrase it in the right way. But the point is that, PMAs will require it. But even presenting your clinical strategy to the FDA, they'll say yes or no. They'll say like, yeah, you can improve that. You need a higher sample size. You need better demographics. You can't just focus on one group. What is the age difference? But also, what is the difference between education level, right? Technicians versus nurses versus doctors versus, specialists, right? And every subspecialty will be different too. Psychiatry, right? Versus, cardiology, radiology, like that matters as well. So the timeline, I would say, for a 510K process, it's contingent upon what the risk of the product is, right? And when I say risk, there are the class 2 products. You can have a low, moderate, and high risk class 2 products, right? They still classify as class 2, but you won't need as much data to support it. So if the higher end class 2 devices, they could have biocompatibility, they could have cybersecurity, they could have EMC testing, which is electromagnetic compatibility. So all these things, they take time, right? Because you need to kind of outsource that to some of these manufacturers or contract manufacturers that will take care of that. So it's kind of like waiting in line. So it really depends on how long that line is, depending on how many requirements you have. So I would say that laying out these requirements at an early stage will give you that optimization of time, because you'll get a sense of what needs to be accomplished from a testing perspective, because that's not in your control. You can tell people to do the test, but you should have a strategy and then reach out to those respective companies, like Eurofins, for example, or like Nelson Labs and all these companies that do this testing. So you get a sense of what the timeline is. But generally speaking, it takes about 6 to 9 months for a clearance to happen. So let's say you submit today, the FDA they will take 6 to 9 months to give you an answer, whether you will be substantially equivalent or not substantially equivalent. So it's SC or NSC. And the PMA route, it's a little bit lengthier. I've seen between like 3 to 5 years for a PMA, and it really depends on like what you're trying to do and how much clinical data you need, because that'll extend that timeline or decrease that timeline.
Absolutely. Another question is coming is basically, if the device is, so you mentioned the risk of the device varies and determines the class in which it gets categorized based on the intended use. Is there some strategic approach devices could take to classify them as low risk? Let's say if I have a wearable device which might be intended for particular diagnostics, basically may become a good risk or moderate to high risk, versus could I enter the market and get class 1 approval by using some strategic approach that it's not for diagnostic kind of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. So any consultant, that's when they're trying to figure out an answer, they'll say it depends. So when I say that, so like I've dealt with some examples of that, because there are something called general wellness products too, and those are not regulated by the FDA, right? So there's a distinction between class 1 and general wellness. So actually for general wellness, you don't even need a quality system. You can sell tomorrow. You can sell something that, tracks your sleep, all these things. Like it's not doing anything, it's just tracking your sleep. What you do with that information will increase the risk of the product,
Yeah.
right? So if you want to say, oh, they want to measure your sound waves, fine, but you're not doing anything with those sound waves. But if you have another statement saying, oh, the sound waves will detect sleep apnea or detect something, then that product risk will go up. So that's why I'm saying that intended use statement, that statement of what you want to do, is very powerful, because that'll tell you whether if you're general wellness, class 1, class 2, class 3, etc. Or if it's even feasible. Maybe it's not even feasible. So, yeah.
Got it. Another question is that from the budget standpoint, like a lot of startups and medical device companies or SaMD initiative, they are looking to raise fund. And traditionally, the path has been for companies trying to enter US market or global market. First, they raise fund to get the clinical trial in a local country, let's say in India, and then they sequentially raise for FDA trial and FDA regulatory pathway. What would be your recommended approach, and how much should they plan as a budget? If you can give some rough estimate, so that could help in their fundraising effort.
Yeah. This is not financial advice, by the way.
No financial advice, but just references.
No, I'm kidding. But no, I would say the budget part is very difficult to say, right? Because it really depends on, and I go back to the same thing and repeat myself, because, you have to know what the use cases is, or, if there is a use case, right? So you could have a device that's very low risk as a software medical device, but what I recommend to a lot of my clients is that, don't try to eat the whole sandwich in one bite. Take baby steps. Enjoy the first bite. Savor it. See if you like it. See if you enjoy it. If you don't, you can always put something on. You can put sauce on there to make it spicier or something. But the point is that start somewhere. Don't try to do the whole process in one shot. So what I recommend is that, here's an analogy. I've worked on products where we just want to focus on I would say, the intended use. Saying it's supposed to measure XYZ things, especially it measures blood flow, right? But don't say anything more than that, because what you're doing with that blood flow, am I diagnosing Alzheimer's? That'll increase the risk, which is increase the timeline, which is increase your budget. But for investors, what they want to see is that, from my opinion at least, is that they want to see that the team has the ability to get the product through the FDA. It's difficult. The 510K process is not an easy process. Yes, it is. 80% of submissions are probably 510Ks, but it's a lengthy process. But that's how you make money, right? If you cannot sell those products without a clearance, so you cannot bring in revenue. So take baby steps is my point. If you take baby steps, you will get to the market a little bit faster, and you can show that we can do this. And then you can also start creating a plan to clinical study data for that product that you already cleared. So you don't need to compare anyone with that at the point. You can compare it to yourself. So there's a beauty in that too, right? Because then you have no other predicates there that are necessary, because you've already cleared your product. You can use it for your submission, for your next submission. So there's power to that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other question? Maybe I'll do a just quick call out. Any questions? Satish ji, Rashri ji, Rabia ji, Suraj, Pawan ji, Manish sir, anything you'd like to add? You're on mute, sir. You're on mute, sir.
Raghu, I'm done with actually.
Okay.
We're looking forward to way forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thanks a lot, Amit, for taking out time today for
Yeah.
sharing such valuable insights around very ambiguous regulatory and system in US, and making it so clear in very crisp and brief manner, as Manish sir said, and throwing some light on your perspective. Anyone has any questions or follow, feel free to
In
reach out.
fact, Raghu, let us also share the announcement with Amit's company. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are collaborating with Amit ji on Devan MedTech solution. So anyone looking to enter the US market, please feel free to reach out. Amit would be happy to guide, and it'd be great to get the products from different parts of the world, reach global population, reach wider population, and help lot many. So that would be a great initiative to collaborate with Amit.
Yeah, absolutely. Always feel free to reach out. LinkedIn, email. I think Raga has all my information, so feel free to reach out to him if you want to get in touch with me. Or, I want to thank Healthcare Continuum for giving me this platform to speak. It's been a pleasure. It was fun. I enjoy doing these things. I have fun with it, and I think a lot of life is people take life too seriously sometimes. I know we're in a serious, I would say, environment, obviously, but doesn't mean you can have fun with it and still protect people and still get these products to market in the right way. So, in that regard, that's the type of personality that I am. And I think it really helps my clients think outside the box, think creatively, think innovatively, but still protect people at the same time. It's very possible. It's called a harmony, right? So that's kind of what my motto is. And, I try to use it day in, day out.
That's lovely. No, thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for joining on this Saturday. Appreciate your time and interest, and we'll stay tuned. With that, I'll conclude the session for today.